Okay, we've been studying about the time the Jews returned to Jerusalem and the surrounding area. Last week we had Nehemiah go back and they rebuilt the walls around the city so they would be secure from their enemies. And I left my notes. Hold on. No, yeah. Okay, lots of little things. After they got the wall built, they of course had a big party and celebrated. It happened to be finished at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is basically when God instructed the Israelites to go camping for a week. That was their feast, was they had to go live in tents for a week. And they had a great time celebrating. And Ezra, who was a contemporary with Nehemiah, read the entire law of Moses to the entire congregation, and many of the people realized they hadn't been living right. The rich realized that they shouldn't be enslaving fellow Israelites, so they freed their Israelite slaves. There were many men who had married non-Jewish wives, specifically wives from the nations that God had told them not to intermarry with. There were a few nations, such as Egypt, that God had said, you can marry them and your grandkids can come into the temple and worship me. But there were some nations that had been so evil, especially evil towards Israel, that God had said, you don't ever, under any circumstances, marry these people. And these men realized that they had married people from those nations. Now, why would it matter? It matters because usually if someone who serves God marries someone who doesn't serve God, they both don't serve God. And God wanted to keep his people serving him. So he gave them the rule they're not supposed to marry outside of the Jewish faith. And that rule is repeated in the New Testament, that we are not to form any partnership with people who are not Christians because it draws us away. And it applies not just to marriage, but like business partnerships. Don't go into business with someone who's not a Christian. You won't have the same moral standing for your business, and there will eventually be conflict. So it is best when forming permanent relationships, do it within your religion. And I kind of just say anybody. I mean, if you're a Buddhist, don't marry an atheist, you know. But especially Christians. Form partners with people who are Christians. So you have that together. So they set about to divorce the unbelieving wives and take care of all that, make sure everyone was provided for, but get the Jews so that they could worship God. Then for a time, Nehemiah went back to the capital city, Susa, and he served the king for a short time. And then he came back to Jerusalem, and when he got there, he found out things had kind of fallen apart while he was gone. There was some guy living in the temple. His name was Tobiah, and he was living in the temple, and that wasn't allowed. You weren't allowed to live in the temple. So Nehemiah kicked him out, threw all his belongings and everything out on the street. There were people coming in on the Sabbath and opening their booths and selling things and conducting business just like normal. And God said the Sabbath was to be a day of rest and a day to focus on him, and you weren't supposed to do business on the Sabbath. So Nehemiah kept the gates shut so they couldn't come in the city. And when they camped outside the city gates in hopes of doing business out there on the Sabbath, he said, look, you keep doing this, I'm going to arrest you. So I'll throw you in prison. So just quit coming here on the Sabbath. And they listened to him. It is about this time, well, also he found out people hadn't been paying their tithes. So the Levites were going hungry because it is of God's design that those that God blesses with anything pay a tithe to his church to support the ministry of the church. The ministry feeds you spiritually, you feed the ministry physically. It's the way it works. The New Testament reaffirms this, that those who preach are supposed to live off of what they preach. Can't always work that way in our culture, but that's the way it's designed in the Bible. And Nehemiah scolded everybody for that, and they started feeding their Levites again. And about this time, Haggai and Zechariah, who are over here, some of the last of the minor prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, began to prophesy. I got a thing in my way. Ezra and Nehemiah are in the books of the history, and the book of Chronicles also has some of this story, though not a lot. Haggai and Zechariah begin to prophesy that God was saying, look, you've built the walls, and now you're building your houses. You forgot something? You were supposed to rebuild my temple. Haven't you noticed that all of your food is mildewing? And that you're not getting any rain? And that things are not going good for you? You start refurbishing my temple. Get it up and running. And see what a difference it will make. And the people did. They began to rebuild the temple, and it began to rain. Their crops began to produce. Their food quit mildewing. Things began to be really good for them when they put God first. Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. So put God first, and then God will take care of you. I've heard it described as, if you have a jar half full of rice and a jar full of walnuts, you can't put the walnuts on the rice, they won't fit. But if you pour the rice on the walnuts, everything will fit in one jar. You got to have your big rocks, your big nuts first, and then God makes sure everything else gets taken care of. So put your priorities first, put God first, and then everything else works out. So let's sing our song. From glory to glory, He's changing me, changing me, changing me. His likeness and image to perfect in me. The love of God shown to the world. For He's changing me from earthly things to the heavenly. His likeness and image to perfect in me. The love of God shown to the world. From glory to glory, He's changing me, changing me, changing me. His likeness and image to perfect in me. The love of God shown to the world. For He's changing me from earthly things to the heavenly. His likeness and image to perfect in me. The